Hello and welcome to session 211 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll be discussing On Classic Arguments for AI Discontinuities by Ben Garfinkel. Ben Garfinkel is a research fellow at the Future of Humanity Institute in Oxford. This article is a Google document with a disclaimer written on top. Draft may be confusing or contain silly mistakes. There's no date, title, or even author in the document itself. So at least I hope it's by Ben Garfinkel. So again, I would like to say thank you to Ben Garfinkel for critically examining the arguments for AI risk. I think it's really important that this is done, and not enough people are doing it. One of the things that I will limit myself to is to only talk about the part where Ben Garfinkel analyzes the arguments in the book Superintelligence: Path, Danger, Strategies by Nick Bostrom, instead of the classic arguments, which is somewhat more broad. Ben Garfinkel is not just analyzing the classic arguments in this document, he's actually also talking about what will the actual implications for AI risk be. And so he has a number of appendices where he talks about this, and I won't go into the details here. I think it's important, something that should be written up. The only thing I can't stop myself from saying is that there, in Appendix 3, he is missing any discussion about G, the correlation between different tasks with regards to intelligence. There is also quite a bit of references to comprehensive AI services by Eric Drexler. I have already discussed this at length in two presentations, 148 and 149, so I will not be repeating these. Up front, I'll start with my main problem with this, and actually not precisely with Ben Garfinkel's work, but just as much with the book Superintelligence, because both this text and Superintelligence defines an AGI, artificial general intelligence, as an AI that can at least match a typical human's ability to perform nearly any given cognitive task. So Katja Grace draws this as a radar plot, where the problem for me is nearly any given cognitive task really isn't that interesting. At least we only care about the strategically relevant tasks, such as Bostrom's 6 cognitive tasks. I would like to go even deeper into this and split the world up on whether the AGI is capable of recursive self-improvement or not, and just define AGI as something that's capable of recursive self-improvement. I believe that this definition cuts the world at the joints, and the other have substantial problems. And again, this is not Ben Garfinkel's fault. This is a problem in the book Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom and in the classic AI risk arguments. So let's a number of the places where this is important are in some of the counter arguments that Ben Garfinkel use. If we have like this intelligence, this dimension of intelligence called intelligence amplification, Ben Garfinkel is almost using a reductio ad absurdum argument, saying that we might have AIs that are very good at recursive self-improvement, but they would not, by this definition, be AGIs. And we could also have AIs that could do just about everything, including intelligence amplification, but as long as there is a narrow task, you could call it a captcha, even though that's not the word Ben uses, then those would not be AGIs, even though they, for all practical purposes, would be superintelligence. So for the actual, I've restructured the document quite a bit. So I'll start out with some definitions. The first definition is a transformative AI system, which is important because when we're talking about both the process leading to AGI and further to superintelligence, we need to define a jump in the transformativeness of AI systems. Ben Garfinkel puts a question mark around his own definition, and because it's really fuzzy and he can't really get a crisp definition, it might be impossible. And I agree, it's really hard to define this, and that's why I think it's really important to try really hard. This definition is, however, somewhat problematic in the word transformative, because if we have a system that could transform the world but doesn't do it, is it then transformative? That becomes important when we talk about a intelligence explosion where an AGI could build a superintelligence, but doing that and nothing else. Is that transformative? That's a good question. I don't really know what Ben would answer. In his own definitions, he brings up Paul Christiano's very economic-centered definition of a takeoff. He talks about things like the number of tasks that the AGI can do, how general it is, how long-term it's thinking, how goal-directed agency it is. I think that probably Ben Garfinkel is not strictly thinking about recursive self-improvement, but more about economic productivity. There is another problem, rather fundamental, unfortunately, and that's the relationship between human-level intelligence and superintelligence. Here we have the two definitions next to each other. Human level matches the intellectual performance of a typical human, and superintelligence greatly exceeds any human ability, no matter how clever, basically. And first a small nitpick. There are a number of places in quotes where there's a letter written in these kind of brackets, like sick. And I've checked in my book, there are no such errors. It says impression 12, and I'm not entirely sure what that means in my book, Copy of Superintelligence. So, onward to the actual meat of this. Here we have human level and superintelligence, and Ben Garfinkel makes the statement that we might get superintelligence before we get to the human level. And he argues for this, saying that we might, once we get an AGI, something that matches everything, then we might have AIs that are matches human performance that vastly exceeds human performance in all domains. The example he gives is with a brain in a box. If someone just comes up with a computer program running on a single computer that basically is like as cognitively advanced as a brain, then he says that would certainly not precede superintelligence. I don't understand this. I am putting up a big warning sign here that I am confused about this. The way I see the definitions, the human level AGI is something that comes strictly before superintelligence. It's possible that Ben Garfinkel is talking about the difference between the intellectual performance and the cognitive performance, but I'm not really seeing a difference there. It's also possible that the difference is all practically important domains and all domains, virtually all domains of interests in the definitions. But to me, the all interesting domains is broader than the practically important domains. There are more interesting things than there are practical things, and so superintelligence should be strictly greater than human level. So there's a major problem in an early definition, and there's of course a risk here that I've misunderstood Ben Garfinkel completely, and this is invalidating everything I say here. We need more definitions. We need there's a definition of basically the intelligence explosion called explosive aftermath. Here we have Nick Bostrom's definition of a fast takeoff, which is that there are days between we reach a human level machine intelligence and we reach a strong superintelligence. For not entirely clear reasons, Ben Garfinkel chooses instead to have a different definition. There will be a sudden jump from the first AGI system to dramatically more transformative systems. I think here there is at least an intuitive difference between Bostrom's definition and the way Ben Garfinkel conceptualizes it, because the way I see to reach the strong superintelligence here, you're doing things like turning the entire Earth into computronium matter optimally structured for compute, whereas the explosive aftermath, what Ben Garfinkel seems to be thinking about, is something like quadrupling GDP. And of course, if you have a fast takeoff where you quadruple GDP, that means that you have like 4 days of growth in 1 day, which totally doesn't transform the world. But if you turn the world into a computronium, then obviously you have radically changed the world. There are more definitions that need to be had, and this is the one that's critical for Ben Garfinkel, his new contribution: sudden emergence. There will be a sudden jump to the first AGI system from dramatically less transformative systems. In other words, all of the AI systems that precede AGI will be fairly inconsequential. So again here, when we're talking about transformative, in the takeoff scenario given by Nick Bostrom in chapter 4, the first AGI improves itself recursively and doesn't do anything else. So that means that transformative in this case must mean something that is potential, because otherwise it would be impossible to have both sudden emergence and explosive aftermath. And I think that is how Ben Garfinkel visualizes it. So here again, we have the two definitions next to each other. And it seems to be, if we want both of these to be true, then there is a 3-step hierarchy, in that first, before the first AGI, we have fairly inconsequential systems. At AGI, we have something that is dramatically more transformative. And after the explosive aftermath, then we'll have something that is even more dramatically transformative. So this is my interpretation of Ben Garfinkel. It's quite possible that it's wrong. That we start with in a state where we don't have AGI, then we either have slow emergence, where we gradually get transformative systems that are fractional on the way to AGI, or we could have sudden emergence, and this leading to the first real AGI. From there, we could have a slow takeoff on explosive aftermath, you could say, where we get AIs that are transformative more than AGIs, but still over a long period, or we could have a fast takeoff ending up with a strong superintelligence. That's my visualization of it. I think this is, I'm interpreting quite a bit on Ben Garfinkel here, and I'm not 100% sure he would agree. He's using the word dramatically about both. Maybe there's some kind of equivalence. I'm not entirely sure this is correct, but this is how I understand him. So to clarify this, Ben Garfinkel gives two examples of both one a scenario where the sudden emergence thesis is false and one where it is true. And of course, there's a spectrum between these two. In the smooth expansion scenario, we have, before we get AGI, we get a lot of AIs with progress that are very domain specific, and they gradually become more general, long-term agency. And when we finally get one system that is as powerful as a human in all domains, then we basically already have superintelligences everywhere. In every particular domain, we have something that is better than humans. So this is closely related to the comprehensive AI services framework by Eric Drexler. The other end is the brain in the box scenario, where one day a week we get classically an algorithmic insight, but it could also be more resources, and that ends up with a single system that can do roughly what a human can do, and all the things that come before are reasonably unimpactful. To me, the problem with these definitions is that we are mixing two factors very much here. How fast do things increase, and how uniformly do the different cognitive skills increase. And that's why I feel this doesn't really cut at the joints. The things long-term, whether it's agentive, whether it's general, these things don't really matter very much, at least in my opinion. The thing that cuts at the joint is whether the AGI is capable of recursively self-improve. Ben Garfinkel has a number of comments on Bostrom's intelligence explosion scenario. First, a criticism that he does not explain what the y-axis represents here. He does actually. It's written in the text. It's the intellectual capability of the most advanced machine intelligence system. Ben Garfinkel says he interprets this as very roughly proportional to an entity's capacity to produce economic value. And I think the word capacity really is important here, because when you actually want to produce value, then you need a lot of other things that intellectual capability, right? You need resources and time and all these things. And in Bostrom's conception, which is different from Ben Garfinkel's, then the only thing that the superintelligence probably is really working at is itself. So Ben Garfinkel visualizes that we'll see dramatic changes in the growth rate here at the point where we have AI systems at the human baseline. But what Nick Bostrom is saying is that we'll actually not really get any changes in the world until we get almost to the end. Of course, when the world is turned into computronium, that could arguably be called economic value. So the conclusions that Ben Garfinkel draws from this. Let's start again with the sudden emergence thesis written up here again. Ben Garfinkel believes that this is often implicitly assumed to be true, and this thesis play a key role in supporting AI risk concerns. My answer to this is that the word transformative can mean very different things. It could mean that the entire Earth is changed that the economy grows 4 times as quickly, or in the recursive self-improvement, it could mean extremely little, that it contributes at least non-trivially to one project. So imagine that you are working on, let's say, GPT-4, and just like GPT-3, there are like 30, 40 people involved, and then you decide not just to have these 40 people, but also 41, where the last one is just the input from GPT-4, basically. And so this extra resource becoming valuable on the margin. Is that a discontinuity? Yes, you could say it's a discontinuity, just the smallest possible discontinuity. And I mean, that can be, you could call that a discontinuity, and I believe that's a possibility, and Bostrom also says so. And Bostrom probably takes this because it simplifies the analysis, and he says there are a number of limitations in his model. But this marginal, that the resource becomes marginally valuable, is something that's assumed. It's not really implicit, but on the global scale, where the economy is quadrupled, is something that is not assumed. And I believe that it can be both true or false without influencing the arguments for AI risk. And also I believe that sudden emergence plays a small but notable role in AI risk. So the analysis in superintelligence is claimed by Ben Garfinkel to not really reference other systems, like, for instance, something that can build DNA or something like this. So it actually does. There are a number of descriptions about other technologies that may matter, such as these in chapter 2 and chapter 3. They talk a lot about non-machine intelligence path to superintelligence. And in particular, the summary here at the end of chapter 2 discuss precisely what other strategically relevant non-AGI systems could be. It concludes that this doesn't really influence the probability of takeoff, but does influence the probability of an existential catastrophe. That's a very rough summary. If you know Nick Bostrom, then making a one-line summary of something like that is reasonably impossible. So the other argument is that whether this is important, and the argument why these non-AGI systems would not be important in a fast takeoff scenario is that basically nothing outside of the project taking off is relevant. Whether someone else is doing protein folding, that doesn't matter at all, because we are if there is a takeoff that happens within half an hour, then what everybody else is doing doesn't matter at all. The second argument advanced by Ben Garfinkel is a these are brains on a train, the best picture I could find. This is a long quote from the beginning of the book Superintelligence, page 4, where the train of improvements it might not pause or even accelerate at Humanville station, and it's likely to swoosh right by. And Ben Garfinkel reads this as saying that the first AGI is conceptualized as something which roughly matches a human brain. I think this is likely to be a overinterpretation of some very flowering prose that Bostrom is using. Bostrom's argument here is about the speed that we'll go at, whether we'll break at the human point, what's the distance from one to another, where we're going, and he seems to argue against the claim that we will stop at the human level. That seems to be the main point here. It's quite possible to have even the opposite interpretation, that there is absolutely nothing special about the human level, and no reason to believe that this has any privileged position and might be something we would ever have. Also, this is just something from the very beginning. It's not repeated, this analogy, and of course, if you go to the later descriptions of the intelligence explosion, how this will actually happen, and what will be the requirement before we can have a takeoff, intelligence explosion thesis and recursive self-improvement, respectively. And against Ben Garfinkel's interpretation, there is this quote explicitly from Superintelligence, which has a system that a scenario where there is a system that at no point roughly match those of a typical human. Bostrom says that fast takeoff scenarios offer scant opportunities for humans to deliberate. Nobody need even notice anything unusual before the game is lost. This, Ben Garfinkel takes to mean that the development of AGI will likely catch people by surprise. And of course, this is here Bostrom is talking about fast takeoff, and here Ben Garfinkel is talking about the development of AGI. And here he talks about the systems before we get to AGI. And if we here have transformative systems, then that would be unusual and noticed. I think this is probably not a very good argument. I mean, Ben Garfinkel is of course technically correct that Bostrom is wrong to say that nobody would notice anything unusual that day, because, I mean, someone is going to win the lottery on that day, and that would be very unusual for that person who won the lottery. But the interpretation that Bostrom almost certainly has in this is that nobody need notice anything unusual about this project, about the system that's undergoing a fast takeoff until before the game is already lost. The fourth part is that superintelligence tends to discuss AGI in a way that suggests there is no relevant continuum between their capabilities and associated safety challenges. I agree, actually. I think in particular superintelligence doesn't discuss AGI enough. There is actually surprisingly little about that. And this is why I believe my definition of AGI as capable of recursive self-improvement is just better. There is some binary language in the book, talk as developers closing in on success, that suggests that AGI is being conceptualized as lying on one side of a sharp and intrinsically significant threshold. I think, two things. First, this quote here is actually too short. Ben Garfinkel should have talked more, added more here. First, this is about the belief of the actor, not about the actual world. But secondly, this is actually not about closing in on success for the AGI, but closing in on success for the takeoff. So here this quote is not particularly faithful to the book's superintelligence. Now, the arguments for why the sudden emergence thesis is important. Well, if we don't have sudden emergence, then AGI is unlikely to surprise anyone when it emerges. And that's true, almost by definition, but the takeoff might still be very surprising, even if the emergence of AGI is not. Ben-Garfinkel here has a statement, I'm not 100% I understand it, but the smooth expansion scenario implies that we can be confident that AGI will not arrive in the very immediate future. The way I understood the smooth expansion scenario is that this is somewhat post hoc, that it turned out that there were no sudden revelations on the way to AGI, so you can look back and say that turned out to be a smooth expansion, but it's not really a prediction. You can't say, because we know that there will be no sudden breakthroughs, then we know we will not be surprised. That's a circular inference. Another argument is that we'll have some institutional preparations for AGI if we don't have sudden emergence. And I agree, we will. But the preparations for AGI need not at all have any relevance to a takeoff, which is very different. Second argument is that we will probably have a lot of important challenges before AGI, like deep fakes and protein folding, drone swarms, great power competition. We actually do have a lot of those, and I agree, and they are important, but they are far, far less important than an existential risk and a takeoff. We'll also likely have alignment worries before. I believe actually we do have alignment worries already now. I mean, I'm worried, right? And the smooth expansion scenario, then this doesn't really matter very much, because alignment doesn't really become a problem while we have AIs that are subhuman, because whether they are actually aligned or just fake aligned, pretending to be aligned, it doesn't matter because it results in the same behavior. I feel more likely we'll get a false sense of security. Further, Ben-Garfinkel says that the emergence of AGI isn't really a particular sharp or important point to focus on. Again here, this is, you remember the radar plot from the beginning, this confusion about whether you could have an intelligence explosion without AGI, which you totally can't by Bostrom's definition, where you just have one that's really good at intelligence amplification and can't do anything else. So I think with my definition of AGI, it is an especially sharp and important point to focus on, if it can create a takeoff. The third argument is that if we don't have sudden emergence, then we'll have a lot of experience with AI safety before AGI. That is true. We'll have narrow AI safety issues, but nothing like a takeoff, right? We won't, by the time we have the first takeoff, we'll never have had a takeoff before. If we get severe safety issues with narrow AI, then we probably won't try to make AGI. But I feel that we might have some small safety issues, but no really severe before the takeoff. So if you worry too much about it, you're more likely to be a Cassandra, as Nick Bostrom puts it. And Ben-Garfinkel goes even further and say, if we don't resolve the issues before AGI, we'll die and never get to AGI. I strongly believe this is not true. Like, if you build a narrow AI to drive cars, then that doesn't sound like something that can be an existential risk at all. The problems that we get before the superintelligence are just qualitatively different. He points to Eric Drexler and says that narrow AIs can help manage risks from AGI and also risks from takeoff. And that's true. That is possible. I'm not very fond of Eric Drexler's way, but I believe it is possible. The problem is that the safety systems that help with takeoff, they don't really do a lot of things when we don't have a takeoff. The treacherous turn is another problem. Those seem less plausible if we don't have sudden emergence. In particular, we would have noticed these earlier. I don't think this is correct. I don't believe that an AI will attempt to make a treacherous turn unless it believes that it can obtain a decisive strategic advantage. Ben Garfinkel goes further and say we'll probably have observed both successes and failures. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here about what a treacherous turn is, because upon a successful treacherous turn, we've lost, right? Further, there's a strong selection pressure pushing against systems that attempt to radically undersell their capabilities. And this is true before we have an AGI that's capable of making a treacherous turn. But while we are undergoing a takeoff, this is not true. Because if you have an intelligence that is very, very superior, then it would be able to conceal its abilities without and still being promising enough to be worked on. Another reason why this is going to be important is that if we don't have sudden emergence, decisive strategic advantages are less likely. Because for any strategically relevant dimension, we could have a narrow system that is radically super intelligent along that dimension already. And here it seems like we need to exclude improving itself, because otherwise this statement doesn't really make sense as I see it. At least only the 6 strategic cognitive tasks seems to matter. And of course, by my definition, something that can improve itself would be an AGI. And of course, by the definition of a takeoff, at the end, the system has, or in the middle of the takeoff, the system has greater capability than the entire civilization, and that would be enough for a decisive strategic advantage. A final claim is that sudden emergence underlies intuitions that an explosive aftermath is likely. For instance, there is the argument advanced by Bostrom in the arguments for a fast takeoff that a conceptual breakthrough might enable a jump in an individual AI system's capability. This is totally true, that this is a way that it underlines intuitions, that we could go from something that is below AGI to something that is strongly above AGI, even super intelligent, without ever touching the intermediate levels. This is a quote from Superintelligence, so it's not underlying intuition. It is true, and it's a good argument, but it's very explicit. There are other arguments for an explosive aftermath. For instance, there's a two-system argument. But the two-system argument doesn't have anything to do with systems outside the ones doing takeoff, and whether those came gradually or suddenly doesn't seem to matter at all. We could have contents and hardware overhangs, and I agree, overhangs seems to be more likely if we have sudden emergence. But the ones that happen, the overhangs that are available or become available between AGI and superintelligence, they will come into existence or not come into existence regardless of the systems that exist below AGI. And finally, there's recursive self-improvement, and this is, in my definition, precisely the takeoff, and it's not related to a sudden emergence. So why would all these things happen at the AGI point? These four at least. Well, we don't expect them to happen at the AGI point at all. These are arguments for things that will happen somewhere in the takeoff and not at the AGI point. Except recursive self-improvement, that's the last one of those. And this, again, by my definition of AGI, this is something we will expect at the AGI point by definition if AGI is the one that's capable of recursive self-improvement. Ben Garfinkel asked the rhetorical question, how could an individual system end up in a position of having much more powerful research and development capabilities than the rest of the world combined? And I think this framing is quite problematic, because it's the rest of the world's not trying. Here, the research and development that the AI does is only applied to itself. As a somewhat silly example, I spend more time shaving myself than the rest of the world combined spends shaving me. So that, in a way, seems with this framing, it sounds like I'm outperforming the world, and really the world doesn't care about shaving me, and almost all of the productivity of the world doesn't go into GPT-3 or GPT-4 or something like that. So the conclusions that Ben Garfinkel have is that we assume sudden emergence, explosive aftermath seems more likely, and if we don't have this, then explosive aftermath seems less likely. And I agree that this matters, and it's a factor that should be investigated more, but it's a minor point. The ones in bustroms, such as recalcitrance, is, I believe, far more important for whether we'll have a fast takeoff or not. I also believe that the definitions that Ben Garfinkel are using have some severe problems, and of course also the definition by Nick Bostrom. Ben Garfinkel says that there is very little substantive writing about whether we should expect sudden emergence, and I agree, we need way more work here. And this is just not only here, but in general in AI safety, we need more work. And I think Bostrom in the book Superintelligence, he is very clear that this analysis is really preliminary. He explicitly calls for help in improving this. Ben Garfinkel finds this absence of writing concerning, and I agree it's very concerning for the sake of the world whether we'll get a good transition, but this does not imply a problem in the arguments. That is all for today. Thank you. And